영트의 리액션.
When we left off, Yi had crushed the Japanese at the Battle of Noryang and was busy rebuilding the Korean Navy after their disastrous losses while he was being falsely accused.
Well, yes. As usual, when Yi is in charge, good things happen, and when he's kicked out, when he's demoted time and time again, bad things happen.
오늘은 외국인이 만든 이순신 영상 3탄으로 노량해전 영상입니다. 역시 외국인이 만들었기 때문에 사실과 다를 수 있습니다. 또한 2차 재사용 규정으로 나레이션이 있습니다.
Now, just as he's beginning to coordinate with the Chinese Navy on how to prosecute the war, something major happens. Maybe the one event that can truly change the course of this war. Hideyoshi dies. Hideyoshi dies. 6 years and 4 months after the fateful Japanese landing on Korea, the man who started it all, the man who envisioned a vast Asian empire radiating out from Japan, died. This was a sea change. Hideyoshi had been holding the Japanese in Korea by sheer force of will. As soon as he died, the council of men who ran Japan in his stead all looked at one another and said, "Does anyone here actually want to keep fighting Korea? Okay, show of hands, who wants to stay in Korea? Nobody? All right then."
그렇게 수뇌부는 일본군의 안전한 퇴각과 관련된 협약이 이루어지는 대로 가능한 빨리 철수하자고 동의했지만 히데요시의 침략으로 수십만 명의 동포들의 학살을 목격한 이순신 장군은 그걸 원하지 않는다는 내용입니다.
So Admiral Yi continued to coordinate with the Chinese forces to bottle up the Japanese in one of their last strongholds.
Wow. How about that? At many points throughout this war, had the Japanese offered to leave, end the conflict, I'm sure the Koreans would have been overjoyed, but we're at the point, especially I think with the Chinese here, the Chinese have finally arrived in full force, of course, both on land and at sea. It seems like Korea wants to keep fighting for a bit.
Of their last strongholds.
그렇게 중국군은 육지에서 순천항 주변을 봉쇄했고 조선과 중국 수군은 항구를 봉쇄했다는 내용입니다.
Seeing the situation as hopeless, the Japanese commander decided the best option he had left was to try to bribe everybody. But each time it seemed as though he was succeeding in bribing the Chinese contingents, Yi shamed them into falling back in line.
Bad China.
Yi shamed them into falling back in line. Seeing no hope of...
Yi is like their moral compass at this point. Everybody else just wants to compromise, wants to submit, wants to give in, wants to kind of sit aside. And Yi is the guy who's holding the line and basically holding Korea together at this point.
Peaceful retreat. The Japanese commander had one last plan. He dispatched a messenger boat to slip through the Chinese lines and tell the other major Japanese garrison to deploy all their ships and rendezvous with him as they tried to break their way through the Chinese and Korean blockade.
그러나 장군은 이 계획을 간파했고 대응책을 준비했습니다.
The next night, November 15th, 1598, long after the sun had fallen below the horizon and the water had faded from blue to deep black, Yi told his forces to slip away from the blockade. They would try to intercept the reinforcing fleet in the fateful Noryang Strait. Near 2 a.m., the joint Korean and Chinese fleet fell upon the resting Japanese ships. At first it was chaos, cannon lighting up the water at night, but soon the Japanese tried to regroup. Despite being caught off guard, they still had 500 ships to the combined 150 of Yi and the Chinese. And moreover, they were fueled by desperation. If they lost here, who knows if they'd ever see Japan again?
하지만 연합군은 두 가지 이점을 가지고 있다고 말합니다.
For one, they had once again caught the Japanese in a strait where they could not easily maneuver their massive fleet. And two, even if they could maneuver, many of their ships were transports, which were only useful for boarding and arquebus fire in a fight.
일본군은 배를 몰고 우박처럼 쏟아지는 포탄을 뚫고 돌진하는 공격을 감행했습니다.
Unfortunately for Yi, the Chinese commander, who wasn't used to fighting the Japanese and had no experience with Yi's long-range form of naval warfare, charged forward to meet the Japanese fleet and prepared to engage them in hand-to-hand combat. The Chinese commander was surrounded. Dozens of Japanese ships descended on the Chinese flagship. Yi ordered his own ship to attempt a rescue. Yi's flagship plunged into the midst of the enemy.
Now, again, this is loyalty right here, and this is character. And Yi is obviously a man of very noble character. He didn't have to do this. He could have said, you know what, that guy's an idiot. He just cost us the battle. He's going to die. And stuck with his strategy and probably saved a lot of lives. But he goes in to protect his allies.
He was committed now. It would be fierce, close combat the rest of the way. Exactly the type of fight Yi had always tried to avoid. The vessels were so close that unarmed Korean sailors began throwing bundles of burning sticks down on the enemy decks. As Yi's ship broke through the waves, he spotted 3 of the enemy's admirals standing on the deck of one of the Japanese ships attacking his ally.
그래서 이순신은 활을 당기자 제독 중 한 명이 쓰러졌습니다.
For a moment, there was almost a silence in the midst of the fighting, as everybody looked to see where that arrow had come from. Then one of the Japanese admirals roused himself from his shock and shouted that it was Yi.
Admiral on admiral combat. How about that?
All the ships must attack Yi. All the Japanese vessels turned and began to give chase to Yi's flagship. But now it was the Chinese admiral's turn to take action, and his ships tore into the vessels pursuing Yi. Soon the fight was on the deck of the Chinese flagship. Chinese Dao sparking against Japanese katana.
결국 일본 함선들은 격퇴당했지만 양측의 많은 사람들이 갑판에 쓰러졌다는 내용입니다.
As dawn began to bring light back to the scene, everyone could see how badly the Japanese were faring. They attempted to flee, but Yi would have none of it. These people who had come to his land, who had despoiled his home, who had slaughtered his people and endangered his nation, no, he would not let them flee. He grabbed the mallet from the ship's drummer and began to beat the war drum himself, urging his ships to go ever faster.
This is like the ultimate made for a movie moment, right? You know, finally got the upper hand, and the great admiral grabs the drum and starts beating it himself. I mean, I know there've been a couple movies made about Admiral Yi, and I haven't checked any of them out, but I hope they really did this scene justice.
영화 노량을 추천합니다.
The haunting echo of the drum pushed the fleet on. Its beat hounded the Japanese, bit at their heels. His fleet moved like it never had before, the drum steadily beating like the call of the god of war. They were upon the Japanese. Cannons roared, arquebuses answered. Shouts and screams were heard as ship after ship was caught by the pursuing fleet, possessed by the beat of the drums of war. But then, just for an instant, the drums faltered. Seen by no one but his son, his nephew, and a loyal servant, Yi had been struck by a stray arquebus ball.
No!
이순신 장군이 쓰러지자 부하들은 달려와 장군에게 무엇을 해야 하는지 물었습니다.
Trying to aid him, asking if there was anything they could do. With his last breath, he said,
No!
We are about to win this war. We are about to win this war. Keep beating the drum. Do not let anyone know of my death.
You know, wow, first off, another display of his bravery, drive, and commitment to the cause.
그 말을 들은 아들과 조카는 이순신 장군님의 갑옷을 입고 북을 계속 두드립니다.
His son picked up the mallet and continued the beat. Dressed in Yi's armor, his son and his nephew took up the command. For hours, they were Yi, commanding as he would, with all his ability and skill. None of Yi's officers ever realized he had fallen until, as the battle was closing, the Chinese flagship was once again surrounded.
And if there weren't already enough comparisons to Admiral Lord Nelson, Horatio Nelson, dying at the height of his fame, at the height of victory, like Nelson was killed again by a bullet at Trafalgar.
개인적인 생각으로 넬슨은 비빌 수도 없다고 생각되지만 전혀 모르는 외국인들 입장에서는 이렇게 생각하는 것 같습니다.
Yi's son ordered his ship into the thick. They darted forward, breaking the cordon around the Chinese flagship, helping the Chinese to escape. The fighting was fierce, but it was near the last of it. And as the day closed, the Chinese admiral sailed toward Yi's flagship and called out to thank Yi for saving him, to invite Yi to celebrate the glorious day together. But he was met by Yi's son. Instantly, he knew what had happened, and 3 times he threw himself to the deck, wailing and crying out, "Even after death, you saved my life."
Wow. Yeah. Yi really is that kind of guy. Even after his death, he's still winning battles and saving lives. Truly, truly remarkable.
Last battle of the war. 300 Japanese ships were destroyed or captured.
그리고 남은 일본 주둔군은 명나라와 조선군에 하나씩 납포되거나 도쿠가와가 쇼군으로 즉위하는 것을 막기 위해 일본으로 도주했다는 내용입니다.
Before Tokugawa's ascension as shogun. At last, the Imjin War was at an end. Hideyoshi's dream of a Japanese empire was broken. Korea was free. But Yi would never see it. Thousands turned out to see his body returned to his small home village. Thousands turned out to see his body returned to his small home village. People lined the road and wailed at the passing of a man they may never have met.
I'm sure. I think they're about to get into it now, but I do wonder how Yi has been remembered. If you're Korean or you have any experience with Korean culture, I'd be curious to know How well Yi is remembered in Korea, is his memory maintained? Is he still talked about? Is he somewhat of a national hero? That's what it would seem like to me, but I have no idea.
The Chinese admiral wrote for him a eulogy, and even the court and the king tried to make their recompense. And so passed the man so ill-treated in life, so often demoted and accused, the man who would forever be known as the martial lord of loyalty.
그렇게 영상은 끝이 납니다.
His country, his Korea at that time period did not deserve Admiral Yi. They did not deserve his fucking loyalty.
And an absolutely fair title that is, the martial lord of loyalty. I mean, you could say a lot of things about Yi, but he was absolutely loyal to not a particular faction, or I would say not even to a particular government, but to his country. You know, that's what he was loyal to.
영트의 리액션